Yeah, because like here's this human thing. It's like there's no point around with it. Why even have to make it start? This is like you're actually investing. This is real. Another way. So like almost, I think almost modify at least half the files. If you have, I like to modify person. I think I want to have to modify the person I added constructors, I think transaction, I literally added 4 functions. That's literally don't know what can't tell you.
Okay, just let you know that I think it's I don't know what you think. Probably this morning I got about 10 students come to my office, the lab, and then we spend quite a bit of time. And one of the major issue I went over is trying to provide a high-level concept about homework assignment number 3. Through that process, I realized there are some challenging issues I didn't cover in class, but conceptually very important for object-oriented programming. So what I'm going to do, I know some of you were there in the morning, might be a little bit redundant, but I want to do a very quick recap, and then I will ask you questions because I asked those students questions as well during the moment. Before I started, I want to say a few things about homework assignment number 3. There is a concept part, there is a motivation part about homework 3, which I'm going to talk about. But there is a programming part, which you have to look at this way. I realized some of the students didn't have time to look at neither one of the reference implementations. So there are 2 reference implementations. The first reference implementation, most of them are runnable, and most of them are not so big, means they're quite short. The first is essentially represent this information. It's basically connect between the client and the server, and there's one particular call called get distance got implemented. So that is basically the one that you should try to understand. If you don't understand the code, please ask me or TA or other student about what it is. So I'm talking about detail, every single line of code, because there are not too many lines, especially those 2 files that generated by the RPC gen, the stuff, RPC, whatever they call it, Json Rpc stuff. Okay, now I remember. Particularly look at hw3 server.h, hw3 server. HW client.h. Those 2 files give you a lot of information to learn. So you have to understand every single line of code over there. If you have a question, please ask me or ask anybody else. Okay. That's number 1. Number 2 is important. I actually gave you another one, the reference implementation 2. I call it enhanced version. And that version is essentially extended from the first one to include 3 programs. So instead of 1 client, 1 server, it became, wait, did I turn on? Can you hear me? I just wondered, did I turn on the mic? Yeah, it seems to me I did. Okay, so the second one is, how do you do 3 server version? Okay, good. So how do I do that? What kind of code I need to change? So that actually also helps you to understand how do you actually extend that code. All right. Okay, so just let you know that the general guideline for you to really to help you to get past a lot of issues, because number 1, those things really help you to learn the object-oriented programming. And number 2, for homework 3, those really help you to kind of clarify the concept. You have some idea about how to move forward. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about overlap, about what I did this morning. So conceptually, what we have is like this picture. I think I'm going to do it this way. I'll just use, because I need to edit. This morning I was doing like scratching on the whiteboard, but I think it's better to just do on the slide. So we have this idea of a flag and the server. So essentially the concept of a shadow flag. So I should say that there are two programs. I will call it P1 here. 1 second. This one is called, this one actually is a machine called P1. Why can I see myself? Okay, this is running on a machine called P1. So I'm going to draw a box here. Hold on 1 second. This is one machine. This machine is called P1. Of course, you cannot see this because I'm going to make it that. Okay, that's P1. Process one, program one, or machine one, that's okay. The second one is another machine over here. Let me make it smaller. And this one is P2. Okay, so I have a P1 machine, P1 and P2. And the real object I want to access means that is a flight information that's actually potentially controlled, managed by, say, American Airlines or United Airlines. So that's the process. So P2 is let's just write it down. This is P2 is actually United.com. Okay, I'll just put it here so you have some idea. That's the real object. Okay, the idea concept is here. I'm writing an app. Okay, I'm writing an application. I'm running an application. I will just call it a mobile app. But this mobile app is actually running on the same machine of P1. Okay, I have a mobile app over here. And I actually want to access that resource or information that's actually stored in the United Airlines server. Okay, number one, before I even talk about the RPC, the first question I asked the student this morning is that, well, if you are going to write an application today, regardless ecs36b or not, I want you to access a file from United Airlines. How do you know where that, how do you actually even refer to that particular file? I mean, if I tell you, go access a file, what information you expect from me to tell you? Yes. Location. What is the most popular way of describing a location on the internet? Not GPS, right? Files is not GPS. What is the location? URL, right? So now remember, what is a URL? I actually forgot what URL stands for. Universal something resource recorder locator or something. Let's actually search for the definition of URL. Universal resource locator. Okay, URL. So URL is http://www.united.com/blah all the way. And at the end, there might be a port number. Because it's not just a resource, but port number. The default port number for HTTP is 80 or 8080. But in general, you can actually find any port number you want, as long as the server actually matching the number. So essentially, just to let you know, I want to actually create a kind of semi-secret file for us to share. I want to use HTTP, but I don't want to use 80 or 8080 because it's going to conflict with other people. Other hackers can easily find it. So I just randomly pick a port number, say 1234 or 57252. And those kind of number, which is only the person who tried to access knows about that. So essentially URL representing that. So I want to show you the code. What is the URL looks like? It looks like this in the reference implementation. If you look at, I think I put it in shadowfly.cpp. If you look at shadowfly.cpp, no, it's actually, yeah, it's fine. But I want to show you HW3 client.cpp first, and then go to the, okay, this is essentially the HW3 client.cpp. I hope you can see it. You see that when I have a shadowfly, the first argument of creating that shadowfly is URL, which is, take a look, not so surprised, localhost 8384. So instead of saying www.united.com, I'm actually just want to access a program locally to my machine. That's why I call it localhost. But I can replace that localhost with www.united.com/document/whatever number. And then at the end, you see that column 8384. That's the port number. I differentiate, say, hey, I'm actually accessing that port. So that whole thing that I highlighted there provide a locator for me to actually access the resource. That's a very important concept. I want you to make sure you understand. You have a question? Yeah.
I don't have the reason to send over
I'll get to that. I'll get to the shadow file. I haven't talked about that, but I want to just make sure we have some basic about why we want to have URL. Then I will get to that. Okay, I'm not as efficient to address that, but I'll do that. Okay. Sure. Any other question up to this point? Okay, and then in the get distance, which is a shadow.cpp, you see what happened is the first argument is the first argument called host.url. That's how you set up the fly. And then inside here, what I did is I used that host URL, which is the shadowfly host.url, and then I used that to actually create HTTP client. Because we're using URL just like the way you use your browser to access certain resources in the internet. In fact, these three things are exactly the same. Number one, how you access your web content. You want to go to Netflix, you want to go to United, you want to go to Safeway. It's the same thing. It's all URL. That's why it's called universal, number one. Number two, when you write the application, you're not using browser. You're not using browser because a lot of applications, they don't use the standard browser like Chrome or Safari. They actually use application directly networking. When they use networking, guess what? They're also using URL. So URL is used by both application and the web that we're accessing. And also number three, the homework assignment, I want you to do homework 3, is also use URL. So we'll use URL to address any object that you would like to contact. Okay, so just remember, this is a very universal and it's applied to pretty much everything. That's why it's important, I want you to know. So that's why in order to do that, I actually include this called HTTP client, which is a library that's actually being already implemented for C++ that you can actually doing a web-based. It's not just web-based programming, but anytime you want to access the concept about URL-based communication between a client and the server, you use the HTTP. That's why you have that HTTP client from the client side. And then what is the URL? That's the URL you insert as a parameter. And based on that, you create HTTP client, and then you can actually start the client side of the communication. Okay, so I just want to clarify that this is the background about how you're going to use this information. Okay, now I'm coming back here. Let me draw another case. If I have a mobile app, let me actually make my mobile app a little bit interesting. Okay, this is my mobile app. Guess what? In homework assignment number 3, reference implementation, the code I show you go this way. Whether I may go this way, let me actually tell you, I draw the arrow. You essentially, from mobile apps or from the driver, you actually call the shadow object. Let me actually change the color of the shadow object to, maybe let me change it to purple. And I like to make it thicker. Okay, I essentially want you to go up to that shadow object in the example. And the shadow object will go to that Json Rpc code I just showed you. They will transfer their request to the real fly object in united.com. And you actually grab the information, return back to the shadow, and then return back over here. So that's actually one way for you to, for the reference implementation for you to, but equally you can do the same thing. I can actually, why not just directly do this? I have a mobile app. I don't want to use a shadow object. I just directly access here, from here. I can go either way, right? Let me actually make it a little bit bigger. So I can write a program, by the way, to do whatever shadow object I'm doing. So I first go to shadow, then go to real. Versus I can write a piece of code directly to HTTP shortcut. Don't define any shadow. Directly access to that fly object and get the result I want. Okay, there are two options. The reason I want to give you a little bit of motivation because I asked the question this morning. There are two options. Which option do you think is better? For those who already know the answer this morning, don't say anything. But yes.
I asked you one question.
Sure.
What situation is like for Wi-Fi or the connection? Connection good or bad?
Okay. We don't know. Sometimes the connection could be in trouble, it could be unstable, right? Sometimes network, just like a VPN, this is totally unexpected. We dealing with this quarter, and sometimes they might have power outage, they might have hurricane, and maybe they have internal maintenance. There's lots of things that could happen. That's a good point. You're leading to some of the differentiation between this approach.
I'd say that shadow is better when it's backwards connection. The regular is better when it's good connection. Virtual functions behind the both at the same time. Like just like one.
You can do that, but you have to write a virtual function. If you're using RPC, and if you're using the same kind of RPC that you're doing the shadow, if I just using regular network, let me go. There are other issues also.
When you share, are you asking what is better to use a shadow or
What I'm asking is, if you develop an application, you want to directly go to the place, which is the information is really locate, or just go to somewhere which you know is local, and then you rely on that particular piece of data, which is a shadow object, to find the final location of the. Okay, so the answer, let me actually, I thought you have something you want to say? I forgot your name. You raised your hand earlier, right?
Oh, no, I was just saying how the first option would be better.
Okay.
Because you're relying on access to the model.
So let me actually tell you that this is what I think is important. It's not just homework 3, it's about general programming. Object-oriented programming, I told the student this morning, is that the second approach directly go to the final destination is actually definitely faster. Usually it's a lot faster. If you need performance, you don't want indirection. You want to directly go there. But the second option implies the application developer has to have a very good knowledge about the locality of the URL. Means that I actually need to track where it is, and then I can actually access to that. And if that resource allocator move, I need to have a code which tracking of it notify how it moved. So the difference between these two is that the first approach, we split the location of that resources from the interface of that object. So all I care when I develop the mobile app right now is that as long as somebody already provide that shadow fly or that kind of wrapper one time, and then I just interact with the object as if I don't care where they are now. I just treat it as a local. So essentially, I split the requirement I need to worry about of an application into 2 parts. One part is actually just dealing with the object-oriented C++ interface about what parameter I need to put in. But then I don't need to worry about where it really is. Let me actually argue that why that is actually huge for programming. When we develop a application program, we have 2 ways to do it. One way is actually we try to do everything from scratch. You try to implement all the code to have all the requirements. So I use this analogy is that you probably need to write 1 million lines of code. You need to write 1 million lines of code and make sure it works. But the second approach is actually Json Rpc. So what they did is that you only need to specify that what you call ecs36b .json file. That file is probably 40 lines, 50 lines. Let me actually show you an example how it looks like. I want to show you this part as well because you can actually see how to extend that JSON from 1 to 4 function. Let me just pull it out very quickly. I'm here. Oh, not this one. Sorry. So this is the file, the JSON file that's actually we call the spec file because the spec file is the input to the code generator that's going to generate, in fact, not just HW3 client.h, HW3 server.h, but also make sure this 2 pieces of code will connect seamlessly to the whole RPC CPP suite of code. So you can see that it's only like this, how many lines of code? 113 lines of code for 4 functions. The first function is get distance. The second function is conflict of interest. The third function is operator equal. And the fourth one is get VSID. And you don't worry about web report for this one. So it's actually, for your purpose, it should stop right here. So what this approach is talking about is that, okay, instead for you to write that 1 million lines of code to deal with everything, what I did is I only write about 114 lines of code, and then I write another addition 20 lines of code, but the rest of the code is already embedded in the library I linked to. So essentially, as a programmer, we should think about, we should reduce our responsibility and our testing time as little as possible. So if you write a 1 million lines of code, just an illustration, is that a little bit exaggerated. But if you have a 1 million lines of code, you know how much it costs to test those 1 million lines of code to be bug-free or close to bug-free. And that is a huge number of resources. But if we use generator code, we use library, those code has been tested by all the programmer, all the user around the world, at least for Json Rpc, probably at least 500,000 users to do that. I mean, ecs36b alone contribute about 2,000 at this point. All right. So because you all tested this quarter, right, to test whether it will work. If it doesn't work, you will raise your issue. So those codes is already tested and is very reliable. So your liability is only for a small amount of code that you're going to develop. And that's the best way for you to quickly implement something big instead of trying to do that. Okay, so that's why I actually asked you to take a look. Remember at the beginning of the class, I said you should read every single line of code that they generate, which means HW3 client.h and HW3 server.h. Let me see how many lines of code we're really talking about. This is, by the way, this piece of code is including all 4 functions. So it's not necessarily, if you go to my reference implementation, it will be even less. HW3 client.h, that's 92 lines of code, including all 4 functions. Server.h, that's another 49 lines of code. Okay, if I take a look at more HW3 client.h, this actually includes all 4 functions. Okay, get distance, conflict of interest, and all 4 functions. So there are not a lot of lines of code, and they replicate a lot. But I want you to really take a look at that because number one, you will understand the mechanism. Number two, you will actually understand what the code generating is trying to do. What kind of code style, what kind of functionality, what is the convention they're using. You learn a lot. Those are the code that has been used by industry for this one, probably at least 10 years. And it really helped you to learn what a large programming. I mean, we talk about large programming. It's not for you to write 1 million lines of code. It's for you to actually come up with a piece of code very quickly that's equivalent to 1 million lines of code. And then you don't have to do a lot of testing because most of that has already been tested. Okay. All right. So I hope you understand this high level. Before I move on, I'm actually going to now drill down to talk about homework 3. I mean, it's really, this picture is just high level, but now I'm going to down to actually talk about any question from anyone. Yes, please. To be honest with you, based on my interaction with the student this morning, by the way, you all should thank those students who actually come here to express their question. I think I'm going to do an extension. I don't think realistically, I mean, just realistically, you don't have to thank me. I want you to learn. I want you to learn. I don't want you to use deadline to discourage most of you. You're to get it to work?
No, I said you've been a quarter behind for the entire time. Great, but you did a week behind for the entire thing.
Yeah. All right. I'll stop there. Yeah, it will. It will. I mean, I already told you that homework 3 is hard, right? I told you homework 3 is hard. And I know no matter how I try, it's still hard. Okay. It's still hard because you need to learn. I mean, to learn the subject is more important than say, I need to grade the homework a little bit earlier. That's okay with me. But I want to make sure you learn very solid because homework 3, I know it's hard. I know it's different from most of the homework you have to deal with so far in the program, but you actually will learn a lot. when I kind of talk to students and say, well, if you can survive this particular homework 3, I think you will learn really a lot in terms of how to do programming. Yeah, please. Good question. Good question. Yeah. I think let me be honest with you. What I certainly hope that you guys don't take a Thanksgiving break. Just when your family are eating turkey, then you're telling them your professor is a cold-blooded professor. They have to do all kind of horrible thing. But I think what we will squeeze in is the final project. I haven't started talking about final project. I really want to. Last year, my final project, I think they didn't get a lot of time for programming. I really want to push you guys as a first, like a guinea pig, to actually write some very solid program, but not in terms of quantity, but in terms of reusability and this innovation. I will talk more about that. It will squeeze into that. So over there, we have some flexibility to adjust to see how we can make. But I have a one rule. I'm not going to take any like incomplete. I want to finish before Christmas. All right. So we have an issue we need to talk about. All right. Because it's really hard for ecs36b to take an incomplete. And this is so horrible for a lot of reasons. Okay. All right. Any other question? Yes. Probably at most 1 week. Let's say just 1 week. 1 week later. Yeah. I mean, okay. Oh, the other thing I want to say. Last time when I sent homework for homework 3, I actually make sure that the student already finished at least homework 3 part 1 by the time the original deadline. So it means that if you want to get extension, I want to make sure that you are. I don't know how to check that, by the way. It's a little bit different, but you need to get homework 3 part 1. Okay, I know what did I do last year? What I did last year is after this Friday, which is original deadline, I'm not going to answer any question regarding homework 3 part 1. Does that make sense? Means that you should resolve. And by the way, this morning there are 2 students come to my office. I help them to install the right library on their machine. So their homework 3 part 1 is done. So all you need to do is come talk to me or come talk to the student, because a lot of them already get it done. Okay, it's not hard. You have to do that. You cannot wait for 12 hours before the real deadline to start working on part 1. It won't work. Okay, for this time. Right, that's what I'm saying. So I refuse to answer any question about homework 3 part 1 after this Friday midnight. All right. Okay. Any other question? Yes. You first, and then. Oh, okay.
What is the web report?
I kind of cut it down a little bit, but we might come back. So what is the web report? Is that whatever you submit to the homework, or you submit to anything, it actually sends a JSON about all the results you have reported to a web server. It will receive your web result, your JSON, and display. So you can actually go check whether you actually have submitted successfully for homework 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, but right now with the VPN, it's getting really tricky. So the difference right now for homework 1, homework 2, or homework 3, when you actually try to do this JSON you submit to the server, you cannot see it. Only I can see it. So web report means everybody can see it. So you can actually see whether you have reported. So I have a website doing that, but the thing is the VPN actually kind of blocking some of that activity, because I only have the server access to Cyrus. That's an issue. Yeah.
So this is the thing you worry about after.
Yes. Yeah, we're not going to mess up with homework 3 for that. Okay. Yeah. So homework 4 is already out. Homework 4 should be really simple. If you have problem, homework 4 we should really okay. I mean, the homework you can see that if you know what we're doing, homework 2 should be fairly short. So just the way to get it fast. Let me tell you that homework 3 I know it's hard. But homework 4 and 5 yeah, there's all the help and resources you can get within the class or with the instructor or other tutor. If you actually just block out the time, try to do that, and it should not take a lot of time. So I will try to push my best to let the rest of homework go a little bit faster, but sometimes it's not just me pushing, and you guys have to collaborating with me as well. Okay. All right. So let's use the last 10 minutes to actually talk about this. Okay, so I'm actually going to the RPC part, and then I want to. So I assume you understand this picture, and then we decide to go this way for the reason that I stated. I'm going to get rid of this. Now I want to go to the RPC. Where's my RPC picture? Oh. No, not in here. Sorry about that. Must be the next one. Ah, here. I got better. Okay, I will use this one. Okay, so the file I showed you earlier, ecs36b homework 3.json. That is a file that's actually going to be used by the RPC, JSON RPC stuff in the red. That is the program that you need to install for homework assignment number 3 part 1. And that program is going to read the JSON spec file, specification of the interface, which is a file I showed you earlier with this 4 function. It itself is a JSON. And that file is actually going to generate the client and the server. And this 2 file is going to communicate. That's a file I want you to read very carefully. Well, here is something which I didn't mention. I have to go back, sorry. Now this one. So essentially what you should be doing is start to modify this file that I showed you earlier. You should actually modify this file. What I give you is just one of the 4 functions. And you start to duplicate that. One of them you need to change because of the So pretty much every single function, there's no input argument. Get distance doesn't take any argument. Conflict of interest doesn't take any argument. Operator equal is the only one that's actually have a argument. That's why in operator equal, the parameter is actually two sets of object. Has a owner VS ID, host URL, class ID, object ID, and then have another, a person, which also have VS ID, URL, class ID, object ID. That's why it's actually duplicate. That's the only difference. And the final get VS ID also doesn't have argument. So what you should do is expand your ecs36b homework 3.json and try to compile with the whatever you modify, and then it will generate a new version of HW3 client.h, HW3 server.h. That will actually give you some idea. And then I ask you to read the code, and now you can actually just manually check whether the code generated makes sense compared to what your understanding about what's going on. Okay, so let me give you advice because I think we don't have enough time. So let me go back here to just summarize what you should be doing. Hold on, where's my lovely slide? Oh, I missed my slide. Not this slide. Huh, I missed it. Not this one. Okay, anyway, don't worry. I'm going to, let me just open again. I think it's 7. Yeah, it's 1. Okay, this is a file. So number one, you should try to learn how the first reference implementation that's actually have this client server version between one shadow file and file, how that will work. You actually know, go through the code, you know what kind of parameter and how you can connect to the second one. And this is the second thing I will recommend. The second thing I will recommend is don't try to add shadow person yet, but try to implement the second function in shadow file. Because now the shadow file only have a get distance. It doesn't give you conflict of interest. So try to implement get distance, conflict of interest. That way you only need to modify ecs36b homework 3.json without introduce shadow person and shadow person.h. And try to see if just two functions will work. Once that's working, then you try to introduce the other two. But then at that time, you need to introduce shadow person and shadow.h. Then you can compare. At that time, I think you feel more comfortable. If you get this 4 function done, you already have 80% of the grade. I think that's what I said, grading policy. But then you can, if you remaining time you use to extend it to 3 server, which I show you, I can actually done it in probably 20 minutes. But for you, you probably can get it done in 2 hours to make the scenario from 2 server to 3 server. The final thing I just want to tell you that the student asked me, well, like homework 2, everything has been provided. Essentially, you actually don't need too much in terms of your own freedom to do some kind of programming or some kind of design. Homework 3 is the opposite. Not exactly opposite. Homework 3 is I let you create your scenario using those person object, transaction object, and those objects for you to create a scenario, which my restriction is that I will allow you to do whatever object you want to create, whatever object you want to put it in P1 or P2 or P3, which means client, server, and another, your decision. But the thing is that you must use all four functions at some point. Means that when you let the object communicate with each other, make sure that all four virtual functions got called. In fact, you know two must go together. If you call conflict of interest, the operator equal will get called immediately because conflict of interest involves compare two persons. You can see that already take care of two. If you have a conflict of interest from client, you know there were two calls already made. Okay, so that's kind of the suggestion, advice I have for you. Any question? Yeah, please.
In the JSON file, I've been wondering why is transaction conflict like why in the middle? Yeah, just all the
Where's the transaction?
the classic. Why is transaction?
Oh, okay, good question. It has two issues. Number one, in the spec file, those things in the value field, the key value, only the key is read by the JSON Rpc stuff. The value is just, it doesn't matter. You put transaction, you put whatever, those field on the right is not being, it's not being generated. The code generated, you see I'm actually putting transaction, right? The code generated will not have transaction. The word transaction at all. I think so. Let me actually check, double check, okay? Grab -I transaction. Let's say HW3 client.h, it doesn't have the word. This two file that's generated, right? Doesn't have it. So in other words, it's not reading whatever in the, but the other side it will work. For example, let me actually give an example. Here you see I have a word called action. I have a word called remote call, right? The word action will be included, but not remote call. Means the value of the key value pair is not being used to generate code. It was just use that for readability purpose. So let me actually, to verify that, if I do a grep I action, yes, it is there. But if I say, what's we call remote something, it's not there. Okay, so it's not being affecting the whole code generation process. Yeah. The second row. This is my honest answer. I don't know, but I think it's because they want to just show the format of JSON. Because the JSON format, because you want to represent the whole thing as a JSON. You have JSON, you have to have a key value pair. So that's why you have a key, which is the parameter. The value doesn't have any.
Just like the JSON library, like how which information, which part of the JSON.
That's JSON Rpc stuff.
So
You don't have to know.
like it's actually response, or is it just different stuff?
It doesn't take random stuff. You only leverage the information on the left-hand side of that column to generate a parameter name. On the right-hand side, is supposed to be the initialization of some value for that parameter, but at least in C++, RPC, JSON RPC C++, they don't do that. By the way, JSON RPC can be used for other programming languages like Python and Java. They might do something different. Like C++, they don't do anything.
Okay, so that makes a lot more sense. Wow. Again, thank you.
It's just like an interface specification language. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording. If you have any questions, I will stay here. You can ask me. Okay.